Let's check them out. First, the argument about who's the greatest. And before we even talk about their argument, can I just point out that they're arguing? They're arguing. These guys, they're Christians. They're followers of Jesus. They believe in him. They're his disciples. And they're arguing. Now, obviously, that's not like a good thing. Right? They're arguing. But here's the thing. It happens. Even Christians argue at times. As Christians, we're still sinful and selfish. We get into arguments with one another. That's not abnormal. Arguments happen. I got into a really bad one with my wife this week, and she won. Okay? Arguments happen. She always wins, by the way. She's usually right. So, this argument, it happens to be about who is the greatest, which sounds kind of funny, but most likely what's going on is some sort of talk about who Jesus liked the best. He only took a couple of them with him up on the mountain when he was transfigured. Who's making the most progress in this discipleship, apprenticeship program. Something along those lines. And what happens in this argument is what's really going on and happening in any argument that ever really takes place. It's when one or both people, they have an eye on the throne of their hearts. Anytime there's really an argument, it's because one person or both people think what they think and what they feel is more important than what the other person thinks or feels. Have an eye on the throne of their heart. How Jesus addresses it is pretty incredible. First, he says in verse 47, knowing the reasoning of their hearts. Knowing the reasoning of their hearts. Isn't that an interesting phrase? We tend to think of reason, that reason is like autonomous, right? That it's like disconnected from our heart and feelings. Like reasons here, feelings are over here. But what Jesus is saying here is it's all interconnected. It's all interconnected. What Jesus does then is he pulls a child to his side. Now, a child in the first century had literally no rights and no status. They were the bottom rung of society. If they had a family, they were their parents' property. Lots of kids, because of that, they ended up as orphans, which is why once the disciples got this lesson that Jesus was teaching them, the early Christians were the first people to start orphanages. An historical fact for you. So Jesus, he pulls this powerless child aside, stands with him, identifies with him, essentially puts him in his family in doing that and says, look, you don't get me unless you receive this child because this child is covered in my name from the Father. He brings up the Father here. And then Jesus utters these shockingly upside down words. Verse 48, he who is least among you all is the one who is great. Disciples are arguing about who is great, who's the greatest. So Jesus is like, okay, you guys, you want to be great? Stop reaching for the top and instead get down low. Stop reaching for the top and get down low. Be willing to be last. Be willing to be the least important. Because those are the ones that God identifies with. Those are the ones that God cares for. When I read this story, I can't help but think about how the child felt. Somehow this kid had squeezed in from among all the people, the crowds that gathered, and the disciples, and all the adults. They probably told him to go home. It's another case where we hear them saying that to another kid, go home. Jesus pulls him aside, he's like, you're with me, boy. You're with me. That kid, he's probably beaming. Man. So upside down, isn't it, to our culture? The least is the greatest. We live in a world that only pays attention to success, doesn't it? Success and achievement. Nobody's hired for having a crappy resume. You sucked at all your other jobs. Sweet. No one gets honored who's never done anything significant in their life. I hear that millennials want awards for anything, but nobody it gets awarded for doing nothing, really. Nobody really wants to be unnoticed, even if you're the shy type. Nobody looks up to somebody that's only got 2 followers on social media and nobody ever likes any of their photos. Oh, I love that person. We don't look up to those people, but Jesus does. Jesus' heart is for the left out, the low, the forgotten. See, when you're reaching and trying to climb toward the top, Jesus doesn't even see it because he's looking low. He's looking low. He's not looking up there. He's looking down here. So if you want to be great in God's sight, you got to get low. You got to serve the low. Because that's where God receives his kids. And there's nothing better than being one of God's kids. That's the greatest. Being one of God's kids. Being in his family. That's really the goal of the cross. Is adoption into God's family. Being one of his kids. The disciples, they had it wrong. It wasn't about who Jesus liked the best, who had made the most progress. It was about God's passion for his kids. Don't miss Jesus. Don't miss his heart and his passion. It's not a worldly greatness. It's a true greatness. True greatness. The kind that's not always seen by others, but the kind that serves others.